The sun hung low over the New Mexico territory, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. Jacob Morgan stood at the fence line of his ranch, watching the dust devils dance across the parched earth. The drought had lasted 3 years now, turning his once thriving cattle operation into a graveyard of dreams. His herd was gone, sold off one by one just to keep food on the table. All that remained was Thunder, his last horse, a magnificent gray stallion that had been his companion through better days. Jacob was a weathered man of 52, with deep lines carved into his face by sun and sorrow. His wife Sarah had died 2 winters past, and his son had gone east, unable to watch the slow death of everything his father had built. The ranch house stood behind him, empty and echoing, a monument to all he had lost. Yet Jacob still rose each morning, still tended what little he had because giving up wasn't in his nature. That afternoon, as he hauled water from the distant creek, he heard crying. Following the sound, he discovered 2 young Apache girls huddled beneath a cottonwood tree. The older one, perhaps 13, held her sister protectively. Both were thin, their clothing torn, their feet bloody. The younger girl's leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Jacob approached slowly, hands visible and empty. The older girl spoke in halting English, her voice trembling with exhaustion and fear. Her name was Singing Bird, and her sister Little Fox had fallen from a cliff while they gathered herbs. They had been separated from their family during a sudden storm 2 days prior. Singing Bird had carried her sister as far as she could, but Little Fox could go no further. Without hesitation, Jacob lifted Little Fox in his arms, ignoring her whimpers of pain. He motioned for Singing Bird to follow. Inside his modest home, he set the child on his own bed, the first person to lie there since Sarah's passing. He had learned some medicine from his wife, who had been a healer of sorts. He set Little Fox's leg as gently as possible, binding it with strips torn from his last good shirt. He gave them water, then beans and cornbread, watching as they ate with the desperate hunger of those who had been starving. As night fell, Singing Bird's fear began to ease. She told him they belonged to Chief Running Elk's band, camped somewhere in the mountains to the north. Jacob knew the name. Running Elk was respected, even feared, a leader who had fought to protect his people's land. The territory was tense with conflict between settlers and Apache. Trust was rare and blood feuds common. Little Fox developed a fever during the night. Jacob stayed awake, changing cool cloths on her forehead, whispering soothing words as Sarah once had to their son. Singing Bird watched him with wide, disbelieving eyes. No white man had ever shown her such kindness. She had been taught to fear them, to expect only cruelty and broken promises. For 3 days, Jacob tended the girls. He gave them his food, keeping only scraps for himself. He made a crutch for Little Fox from an old broom handle. He taught Singing Bird a simple card game, and the sound of children's laughter filled his home for the first time in years. The emptiness that had consumed him began to recede, replaced by purpose. On the 4th day, Little Fox's fever broke. She smiled at Jacob, calling him a word in Apache that Singing Bird translated as kind grandfather. Something cracked open in Jacob's chest, some sealed chamber of his heart that had been locked since Sarah's death. These children had given him something he thought lost forever, a reason to care. That evening, as they sat together sharing a meager supper, Jacob made his decision. The girls needed to return to their family, but Little Fox could not walk the distance, and Singing Bird could not carry her. Jacob had no wagon, no ox, he had only Thunder. Singing Bird protested when she understood his intention. Thunder was all he had left, his only means of survival, worth more than gold in this harsh land. Without the horse, Jacob would be completely alone, completely helpless. But Jacob shook his head, his mind made up. He had watched too much die already. He would not watch these children perish when he had the power to save them. At dawn, he lifted Little Fox onto Thunder's back, helping Singing Bird climb up behind her sister. He packed what little food remained into saddlebags and handed Singing Bird his canteen, freshly filled. He gave her careful directions to the mountains, to the paths where Apache scouts might find them. Singing Bird was crying now, this fierce young girl who had been so brave, tears streaming down her face as she tried to find words for what this stranger had done. Jacob simply nodded, patting Thunder's neck one final time. The horse had been his friend through countless lonely nights, his last connection to the life he had built. And now he was letting it all go, for two children who were not his own, from a people he had been taught to fear. He slapped Thunder's flank gently, and the horse began to walk, carrying the sisters north toward home. Jacob stood watching until they disappeared over the rise. Then he walked back to his empty house, to face whatever came next with nothing but his own two hands and the clothes on his back. He did not regret it. For the first time since Sarah's death, he had done something that mattered, something that made the weight of his losses feel less crushing. He was drawing water from the well the next morning when he heard them. The sound of hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, thundering across the desert floor. Jacob straightened, shading his eyes against the rising sun. What he saw made his breath catch. 200 warriors, maybe more, riding in formation across his land. At their head rode a tall man on a painted war horse, his bearing unmistakably that of a chief. Jacob's heart hammered. He thought of weapons, of defense, but he had nothing. No gun, no horse to flee on, nowhere to hide. So he simply stood there, waiting, as Running Elk and his warriors surrounded his small ranch. The chief dismounted, walking forward until he stood an arm's length from Jacob. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. Behind him Jacob could see Singing Bird and Little Fox, both safe, both watching with hopeful eyes. Thunder stood among the Apache horses, looking content. Running Elk studied Jacob for a long moment. Then he began to speak, his English heavily accented but clear. He told of how his daughters had returned, telling an impossible story of a white rancher who had healed them, fed them, given them his last horse to bring them home. Running Elk had not believed it at first. No white man would do such a thing, not in these times of hatred and war. But his daughters insisted, and so he had come with his warriors, expecting to find a trap, a trick, some cruel scheme. Instead, he found exactly what his daughters described, a poor rancher with nothing left, who had given everything to save two Apache children. Running Elk's eyes glistened as he stepped forward, placing his hand on Jacob's shoulder. In that moment, two fathers understood each other across the divide of culture and conflict. The chief turned and gestured. Warriors began to move, and Jacob watched in amazement as they unloaded gifts. Horses, fine strong animals, 6 of them. As the sun climbed higher, Jacob stood surrounded by warriors who had become allies, children who had become cherished, and hope that had been reborn from ashes. He had lost everything, and in that loss discovered that kindness was the only currency that truly mattered. His ranch would live again, but more importantly, so would he, knowing that even in the darkest times, a single act of compassion could change the world.